Welcome to the Lyric Theatre. It's so good to see all of you here, and to Our Place in Space in conjunction with the Nerve Centre for the next 60 minutes or so before we're bucked off the stage because there's a play on, and we are actually in their set at the moment. I'm going to be in conversation with two gutsy women. That's what I'm going to call you both. I take the phrase gutsy women from the title of a book co-written by Chelsea Clinton and her mum, Hilary Rodham Clinton. A book which is, according to Chelsea, the continuation of a conversation she's been having with her mum since she was little, about women whose courage and resilience paved the way for women today, whose stories needed to be amplified and unfortunately continue needing to be amplified. And on this very stage, actor and writer Tara Lynne O'Neill amplified this city's gutsy women in her play Rough Girls, the Belfast women who kicked their way through a male-dominated sport to form a football team and play to packed crowds. Please welcome Chelsea Clinton and Tara Lynne O'Neill. So, the first question has to be the question that's on everybody's lips at the moment. Dear Chelsea. Now, when I watched the last series and the last episode, I was already crying.
Were you surprised?
Before we even rocked up at a brownstone in New York. And there is you. Tell me, how did this come about?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you to my friend, Oliver Jeffers, and to everyone who has brought us here on this stage and here to Belfast for this festival. I know that efforts like this are always quite intensely the product of teamwork. So thank you to the people I've met and to the many that I haven't, but who have made this possible. So
Get to Derry Girls.
Okay, well,
Oliver's grand. He's grand.
Well, yeah. So my grandmother, who passed away 11 years ago, who I think about every day, and I miss desperately still, more than a decade after she left this earth, believed very strongly in the discipline of gratitude. And so what that means is I always have to start by saying thank you, and I write thank you notes promptly.
Good.
So Derry Girls. So before COVID, actually, the production team reached out to me and said, would I consider participating, just sort of this open-ended question, and I immediately said yes.
Did it involve the wave machine and Listen to Galvin, or?
I mean, it maybe should have.
Yeah.
You'll have to ask Lisa what else she considered, because then as we were kind of moving into the more stable phase of COVID, then I received the, would you be okay to actually getting the letter 25 years after the fact and reading it? And I immediately said yes. And it was so fun and humbling and exciting to be part of, and I just can't believe I was the last day of filming, which I was talking to Tara about backstage. Just felt kind of momentous, and I really am so happy they thought of me and that they included me, and I got to play even a very small part in such a wonderful story.
Thank you. Tara, how much did you know? Were you in on the news that...
Yeah, I knew Chelsea had agreed, and I offered to carry bags for anyone. But they wouldn't take me to New York. I offered to do anything. I said, you'll need somebody to get teas. They wouldn't buy it. But I just thought it was such a beautiful ending to bring Lisa McGee, the writer, in right back to the story.
Yeah.
And also because I was Erin and Michelle's age.
Yes.
I grew up with you.
Yeah.
And that the idea of this, this whole project and Our Place in Space, you were so far away. Yeah. So I was dying to go to New York and be part of that. But also when you were coming to Derry, I remember it was such a big thing. we were as a group of people all going, let's get the bus up, do you know?
Yeah.
Did
your ma let you?
No, she did not. But yeah, no, dude, I thought it was a beautiful ending, and I think it's what Lisa has done brilliantly in the series, which is being able to move you and then lift you. And I think it's one of the reasons the whole series and every series of Derry Girls has worked in that it comes from a place of truth.
Yeah.
And the comedy's there, but she can undercut it with where we were and what we were going through.
Yeah, certainly your father featured in the final episode of season 2. And those memories came back as well of just how the hope that people were looking for. You've been to Northern Ireland a few times, and you've great friendship with Oliver Jeffers as well. Have you seen the place change over the years?
So I haven't been here in 20 years, right? So I was here, in the 90s and then in 2000, and so. Certainly, over 2 decades, which I think just says to me I should have come more often. But, I've also thought a lot about that period in the 90s, not only because I was lucky enough to be part of Derry Girls and not only because of everything that is happening here and all of the uncertainty, though also because I remember that sense of hope and possibility, at least that you were just referencing. And we need that quite desperately right now in the United States to believe that the future can be different, even when very recent history, see the Supreme Court ruling on Friday, is dragging us backward into draconian times. And so I need that reminder of what is possible.
Because I wanted to. I was aware that that you tweeted about the Roe versus Wade ruling, and just to quote your tweet, you said, "My children will grow up with fewer rights than I've had, until we again allow people to make the right reproductive health choices for themselves and their families. I am so angry today." It's a very honest, people are, well, they try to be their authentic selves on social media, others not so. But you went out there and you said, "I am so angry." Do you still feel that anger?
Oh, I'm so angry. I am... I will say, Lisa Marie, I think one of my kind of superpowers, as my husband might say, but also one of my vulnerabilities is that I'm the same person always.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, this is who you get. This is who you get, whether I'm on Twitter or in private or in public. I've always found it very funny when journalists are like, "Do you want to make any off the record comment?" I'm like, "No, this is is just who I am." I am full of incandescent rage on a cellular level. I don't think I've ever been this angry for this sustained period of time. I'm not really an angry person. Even when I get very upset, it is almost immediately just a catalyst for action. I think that is how I have processed my experiences and my witnessing of kind of injustice historically. I have not really been able to process in the last few days because of the enormous harm that we know will now befall women and girls and pregnant people in America. It's not hypothetical. It's not in the distal future. It is here and it will happen. It is happening. And so I am so angry. I'm also, of course, pushing toward action. The push towards action, though, hasn't ameliorated the anger in the way that historically I seem to process things. Because we know that the justices who wrote and signed the majority opinion are aware of the harm and did it anyway. And that, to me, is unconscionable and unforgivable, unacceptable, and we have to commit every day to change it.
The fact of life is that it's happening here in Northern Ireland. And Tara, I know that fellow actors on Derry Girls like Siobhan McSweeney or Nicola Coughlan have spoken out very openly about Alliance for Choice and all of that. And I don't want to put you on the spot because in many ways you are an actor, but do you feel that you want to contribute to this discussion, particularly when here in Northern Ireland women face similar circumstances?
Well, it's interesting because, unlike you, Chelsea, I am never myself. I don't think I've ever been on the stage speaking my own words. And weirdly, that's quite frightening, especially in the world that we live in. So speaking your mind, and we need people like you who can speak out. For me, I try not to make comments, but this isn't the time not to be quiet. I mean, these decisions, and we've been fighting for it here in Northern Ireland, it's a poverty issue because abortion will always happen if you have the money. And it affects the worst and the most vulnerable in our society if you make it about money. And what's happening in America frightens me. It frightens me, and it frightens me for you all, but it also gives me hope that we have people in the world like you who are not afraid to say, you know, and it makes that kind of environment and activism, even though I wrote a play about women's football and going, you know, here's the state of affairs. I'm proper Northern Irish. I'll shout it out and then run away, you know. So I'm better at retweeting. So that if anybody shouts at me, I go, I didn't say it though. But it's people like you that we need to shout above the parapet and raise those issues. And we've had people like Siobhan and Nicola who are more comfortable in that environment. But I just think we're in a time now. And we've done so many things. We've progressed so far. You know, even when I look at theatre, being able to do a show with 14 women on this stage, and it never been done before, to me, that was such a joyous thing to be part of. And to see us going back is we can't let it happen.
Yeah, Tara, I want to build on something that you said. It is an issue of poverty, it is an issue of public health, and it is an issue of privacy. You know, it's certainly an issue of poverty when we think about women who have the time and space to make a decision as to whether or not they want to continue to build their family or to become a mother for the first time. In the United States, actually, the majority of people who have elected abortions are already parents. And they decide, or they at least until Friday were able to decide as to whether or not they had the resources, the financial resources, the resources of time, energy to continue to expand their family. It's an issue of privacy because I don't think that it should require a lot of temerity to say, I have agency over my body to make the right choices for that body. And it is also an issue of public health, which relates, of course, to the kind of questions of poverty and the most vulnerable being made so much more vulnerable. It also, though, relates to women who want to be pregnant and want to start or expand their family, and then may suffer an ectopic pregnancy or a uterine rupture or a placenta abrasion. And in states like my home state of Arkansas, where there's no exception for the health of the mother, the woman has to be on the verge of death for a doctor to have the ability to intervene. But who decides when a woman is on the verge of death? And what happens when the doctor waits even a moment too long? Where then does liability reside? Who is responsible for killing that woman when she could have been and should have been saved. So the ricocheted effects of the ruling on Friday are not only gross violations of privacy and decency, not only will absolutely push more women into poverty and trap more women in poverty, there are healthy women who are not the target of the ideologues in the United States who have worked for 49 years to reverse Roe, who will die on the altar of that ideology. And we cannot look away from the suffering, and we have to force ourselves to pay attention, because it is when we get scared and tepid that I truly believe the forces of darkness keep pushing to pull us backward. We really have had like a whiplash of emotion already. We went from like Derry Girls and the possibilities of like the 90s, something, and women are dying. But we contain multitudes on this stage.
I want to take time now to address that looking at, because as the daughter of two very famous people on this planet, you've also equally become a very famous person too. You are used to being looked at. You could have chosen to have taken yourself off to one side. But listening to you talk, listening to your podcasts, knowing the books that you have written, you have chosen to keep looking and being looked at. Why?
Partly because people were looking whether or not I wanted them to or not. And I realized that was an opportunity to redirect attention into things that otherwise might not be given the attention that I thought they deserved. And so whether that is an issue in public health or a woman's story that I think really deserves to be not only told but known by young readers or maybe not so young readers. And so that's really the answer to your question, that if I really want to try to do all the good I can with all of the kind of resources and time on this planet as we are here that I may have, I had to recognize that attention, even if I didn't want it, was an opportunity and a resource to try to help elevate, amplify, and draw attention to kind of issues and causes and work that I thought was important that often wasn't being paid attention to.
You're an only child. You are the youngest of how many?
7.
7. So let's talk about home life then. So as an only child, were you, as an only child, is it fair to call you precocious? Were you out there? Were you interested and engaged? Were you being asked your opinion of things by your mum and dad? Was that something that was just innate to your growing up experience?
My parents have spoken quite openly about they had hoped to have more children and they were not able to. When I was little, I really wanted an older brother. And I would ask my parents all the time for an older brother.
I had 2.
You had 2? I didn't want them, Tara? Yeah.
You're lucky.
Yeah. So I really, and then I was like, okay, how about an older sister?
Yeah.
My parents like, well, also challenging. My parents expected me to be informed at age-appropriate ways, of course, but like be informed about the world, to be engaged in the world. Arguably, my first active kind of activism was in 1985. I wrote a letter to President Reagan. I was 5 years old.
You wrote a letter as well.
I did.
Okay,
I
good,
did.
good.
I also didn't get a response.
There's still time.
Yeah. Well, so I wrote a letter to him.
What did you say?
Oh gosh, I may be able to embarrassingly recite it to you.
Okay, good.
All right. I think it's a dear Mr. President.
Good start.
Comma.
comma, excellent. Oh, they've lost don't talk to me about commas being lost now.
Comma.
Society. Comma, yeah.
I've seen The Sound of Music. Not what you were expecting, right?
Nope.
Period. Don't worry, there was very good punctuation in this letter. The Nazis were not nice people. Please do not go visit their cemetery when you go to Germany. Sincerely, Chelsea Clinton. And then I also included my favorite rainbow stickers as a gesture of goodwill to maybe soften the rather stringent request.
You and Lisa McGee. I mean, there's really not a lot of separation here.
So I didn't get a response.
Okay.
But far more upsetting was he actually went to Bitburg Cemetery and he spent 8 minutes there. For some reason, that really rubbed me the wrong way. It's like, that felt like a long time when I was in kindergarten, 8 minutes. And he laid a wreath at the cemetery. But thankfully, I didn't learn that raising my voice or writing a letter didn't matter. I was like, oh, I just have to try harder and try to do more.
Yeah. It's funny, whenever you were in the White House, did they have like vaults of previous presidents, you know, with all the letters? You could have gone and found your letter.
I have to say, when you were talking about vault, I had like an image of like, you know, like taxidermied, like mummified.
Well, not quite that,
I'm very
you know,
happy we didn't have that.
Okay. So, did you ever write to anybody?
No. As the youngest of 7, nobody cared what I said. I mean, I only became an actor so that people had to listen to me. In our house, if you wanted to say anything, you had to say it very quickly while somebody took a breath. That was the only way to get in.
Yeah.
And I literally did become an actor so that people would have to sit there and listen.
Already had good breath work.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, I was always ready. No, I wouldn't have had the nerve. I mean, that I'm finding here now in Northern Ireland is women trying to find our space.
Yeah.
And being okay with owning this space. And it's something I struggle with. I mean, people always think because you're an actor, but I struggle with taking up my space and what am I allowed to? And that's not, maybe it is because there were so many of us in our house, there was no space. But it's also professionally being able to go, no, this is what I do, and trying to learn how big your space can be, and not being frightened of it. And I have 4 brilliant sisters who will constantly tell you you're taking up too much space, or you've talked too much. But yeah, I think that's what's happening here, especially in the arts and in music here in Northern Ireland, is women trying to find their space and being okay with it. We're being provided with it. We're just not totally comfortable in it yet. And it's great that as women, we're all trying to support each other and going, no, you deserve that opportunity. You can take that opportunity. And like people like Lisa and Channel 4, you know, writing stories about here. You know, when I was younger, there was only Jim McDonald in Coronation Street. And of course, he was an alcoholic.
I don't know whether Chelsea is aware of Coronation Street. It's a soap, long-running soap.
It was the only Northern Irish accent I heard, because even the newsreaders didn't have Northern Irish accents.
Yeah.
Well, not like mine anyway.
No.
So for generations now to be growing up and hearing our own accents,
Yeah.
do you know, there's so much more. To realise that Lisa McGee is a writer and who's written it, now people are seeing it and then they go, oh, I could be a writer. And there's all those things that, you know, when I said I wanted to be an actor, my family just laughed. Because you just can't be an actor, do you know. But these things are possible now, and I think it's that visibility.
Yeah.
I mean, representation matters.
Yeah.
And it matters partly because of kind of everything that you just said that you're a part of happening now, and also what you said at the end of now, the very different world that young people here are growing up with, so that hopefully, you know, the 12-year-old girl who wants to be an actress is having a very different conversation with her parents because of you and because of Lisa.
And also, like the 12-year-old girls that want to play football now.
Yeah.
And, you know, in case you don't know, I support women's football. And the women have qualified for the Euros, and they're going off.
So, you know, in America, infamously, our women's team is far better than our men's team, but had to sue to actually be paid equal.
Well, we still
to our
don't get
men.
paid, but well done, we're following
All
it.
right, okay.
We got a new kit.
Small victories on the way to larger
Yeah.
ones.
But nobody expected these girls to qualify, and watching them qualify and knowing that, you know, I'm sure if you now look around Belfast, you'll see little images of them. And, you know, for those young girls playing, just wanting to play now and wanting to continue to stay, there is somewhere to go.
Yeah.
You know, they don't just play and then it just fizzles out. There is a team. You can pay for your national team.
Yeah.
And you can, and hopefully one day get paid. But yeah.
But, you know, that's, I think, also why representation matters and yet is not sufficient, right? Because if the women aren't being paid, it can't be a career.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
you know, in the United States this year, we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of something called Title IX, which was landmark legislation that required educational institutions to invest equally in opportunities for girls and boys, for young women and young men. And Title IX fundamentally changed sport in America.
That's why you have the best.
That's why we have the best
team.
women's football team. You know, before Title IX in the early 1970s, you know, a few thousand girls played high school, what we call soccer. I'm sorry, high school soccer. And now hundreds of thousands of girls play high school soccer. We had a handful of collegiate full soccer teams in 1971, and now we have hundreds.
And what's happening here is scouts from American universities are coming over here and scouting our football players and giving them scholarships to study in America and play soccer. Do you know that these girls are flying?
It's and hopefully by the time they graduate, there'll be the opportunity, if they want to pursue a career, for them to actually be able to have a career in football.
And taking their space on that pitch.
Can we talk then about Gutsy Women as a title and how this is you as a writer? And I'm going to talk to Tara about her writing. But let's explore that. Why you and your mum decided. I mentioned at the outset of this that it was the continuation of a conversation you'd been having with her since you were little. So what was the germ of that? What were you saying to your mum? Was it, I've never heard of that woman, or why have I never heard of that woman, or how can I tell her story?
I think for both of us, a little bit of all of the above. You know, we also realized, but probably not until I became a parent and we were talking about my childhood, how radically different my childhood had been to my mother's. Not only in kind of the obvious ways, like when my mom was in school, there were no girls' sports, and even in PE class, she was only allowed to play half-court basketball because they were worried that the girls may tire too quickly, might faint. She has these vivid memories of her gym teacher just telling her, like, it's not your fault. Your heart is just not as big as a man's. So I thankfully didn't have that. That was sort of like the obvious stuff I didn't have. But what wasn't as obvious until we were reflecting back on my childhood as I was becoming a mom was how many of the authority figures in my life were women. And how so many of my friends' mothers were taking up space in a way that hadn't been true for my mom, in which the only women that she knew who worked outside the home were public school teachers or the public librarians. And when I was growing up, most of my friends' mothers worked outside the home. They were nurses and doctors and lawyers and social workers and teachers and librarians. But also, like, the mayor of Little Rock when I was a little girl was a woman. My pediatrician was a woman. Not just my teachers were disproportionately women. I only had women principals at my school. And so we just started this conversation when I was a new mom about kind of what had happened from her generation to my generation, what had happened then from my generation to, at the time, my daughter, and now I also have 2 sons. And we were talking about the stories that she brought into my life as a child, some kind of famous American stories like of Harriet Tubman, and some less famous but were kind of important people who had been inspiring to her that she wanted me to know of. And what stories did I want my children to grow up with. And so we just kept like thinking about all these stories. And then at some point we were like, we should write this down.
Yeah.
And that's
what happened.
That's what happened.
And you also have books for children, She Persisted. And tell us the origin of the phrase, She Persisted.
In early 2017, I was breastfeeding and watching C-SPAN because that's just really on brand for me. And so while I was breastfeeding and watching C-SPAN, it was relatively late in the evening, and it was the Senate confirmation hearing for Jeff Sessions, who was President Trump's then nominee and later would become his first attorney general. Parenthetically aside, I am sure that he is thrilled that he was not President Trump's last attorney general. And so I was watching all this happen, and Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts was attempting to read a letter that the great civil rights leader, Coretta Scott King, had written about Jeff Sessions more than 30 years before. Coretta Scott King, even in America, is, I think, too often positioned and taught as a figure only in the context of her husband, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but she was a very important civil rights leader and activist in her own right, both before they met, while they were married, and then after his assassination. And she had written a letter in 1986 outlining Jeff Sessions' history of racism. He had been nominated to the federal bench as a judge, and she didn't think he was qualified because of how racist he had been over a long period of time. That letter was sufficiently persuasive that his nomination was withdrawn, that the Reagan administration withdrew his nomination. And so Senator Warren was trying to make the point, like, if you were too racist to be a judge in 1986, like, surely you're too racist to be the attorney general in 2017. But of course, for the Trump administration, that was a feature, not a bug. So Elizabeth Warren kept trying to read this letter, and her largely white male Republican colleagues kept telling her she had to be quiet. They finally formally censured her, so they forcibly silenced her, and she had to leave the Senate chamber to continue to read the letter, at least kind of to the media, even though it couldn't be part of the official record. Senator Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, when he was being interviewed, I was watching all this real time. I had stopped breastfeeding by this point. My children were hungry, but not that hungry. But I now had like a sleeping child. I was like watching all this unfold real time. And Senator McConnell cast himself as the victim, because white American men are really good at casting themselves as the victim of often the injustices that they have structured and perpetuated. He's like, we kept asking her to be quiet. She just kept reading this letter. We kept telling her she had to be quiet. It was inappropriate. Nevertheless, she persisted. And that became a real rallying cry for many women, but also for many men about what would be required of us over the Trump years, but also for me, what had often been required of women throughout American history to help us try to become more just, healthier, to have a greater expansiveness of artists and kind of creativity. And so again, was thinking, what are the stories I want to tell my children, inspired by Coretta Scott King and Elizabeth Warren, but certainly not stopping there.
And the women that you chose, were they women who you felt had been largely forgotten by history, or was it, I love this word, amplify, is it that there are stories that are known in certain areas, but you wanted it to get a global reach?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, some of them more well known than others, and some of them I think not very well known at all. The most recent book in the series was She Persisted in Science, and my two older children, my younger one can't sit still long enough to like make it through one page, much less a whole book generally. But my two older children are obsessed with Gladys West, who I write about in the book. How many of you have heard of Gladys West? All right, so Gladys West invented GPS.
Get away.
She created the mathematical modeling for the satellite systems that is still today the architecture for GPS.
Wow.
And she isn't well known in America, and she should be, but she is one of the many Black women whose talents we have taken advantage of and whose stories we do not do a good enough job of telling in the United States. My children are obsessed with her because they can't believe that there was a time when their grandparents and their mom would get lost.
Yeah.
It is very strange to them. They're like, what do you mean you used to drive around and you would have to stop and ask for directions?
And then promptly forget the directions.
Yeah.
but
And I was
still
like,
say
well,
yes.
and sometimes
Yeah.
we'd be on road trips and I'd be in the back seat like looking at these unwieldy maps. No, I couldn't just like use two fingers to make it like larger and smaller. And it is sort of profound when
Yeah.
you think about it, that my children have never gotten lost.
No.
They will never get lost unless they put their phones away. They don't have phones. They will not have phones until they're teenagers. Unless they purposefully try to get lost, there won't really be the experience of getting lost on accident or serendipitously.
Or just saying to somebody, I'll meet you at such and such a time under the clock in the town centre. My kids think that I lived in a time when everything was black and white and people wore top hats. It was only the 80s. I wanted to talk, Tara, about the women that you decided to amplify then in the play Rough Girls. So I ended up coming to see the show, but ended up being kind of part of the set because...
How did that happen?
Well, basically it was well, you should probably describe it, that there were two sides.
We just wanted to make sure that there was people on stage watching the match too, you know, and that feeling of what it's like to be looked at.
It was very uncomfortable.
But you know, these women in 1916, as I said, were walking onto the pitch, you know, in long skirts covering their knee, but that was still more than it ever showed, you know, and there was, you know, there was lots of press written about what they were wearing and what they had done with their hair, and but to be glared at in that way, it was so brave. And I thought, yeah, let's have audience members on stage to know what it feels like. But also they were part of the team. You were part of the team.
Well, we ended up, I've got a podcast called Talking Derry Girls as well. And we ended up we were in one of the episodes, the funeral one. We just about made it before the screen went to black. I've paused it, and you can definitely see my hair. But I was very...
Is it your Zoom backdrop?
It's my Zoom backdrop. No, it's my dog. It's always my Zoom backdrop. So I was very aware that that we were auditioning. I felt that that's where we got the role from, because we did so well sitting on the stage. But I think what was interesting for me was that you felt the energy of being an actor on stage. And at one point in time, all the girls come banging down these steps as they're running out onto the pitch, and like, you know, we were kind of moving along with them. But what struck me was that these were stories, these were women that their story had never been told, and in fact you actually had to do some sort of detective work as well to find them.
I just picked up where the like of Mary Jones and Carol Moore with Shirabang, you know, let go. They'd started telling stories of the women here that have not been told.
In fact, the play, this play that's here at the moment, is written by Mary Jones.
But Shirabang were really instrumental in me wanting to write.
Oh.
And they always, you know, I'd never written before. My mum said, "What are you writing for?"
You're like, but Mom, I became an actress.
Yeah.
I've already done things you thought were impossible.
Yeah, she just went, "Don't do anything. Get a normal job," was her dying words. And that is not a joke, that was. "Would you not get a normal job?" And I went, "Don't make me promise that."
Don't make me promise that.
Thank God, because I couldn't have done Derry Girls then. But yeah, no, so watching what Shirabang did and seeing these stories of women, and then doing history in school always bored me, because there was never any women in it. And knowing that the history of this country, and there's never any mention, you know, especially when you go back to 1916, 1921, you know, and we talk about, you know, the terrible state that this country was in 1921, you'd think women weren't alive. You know, there's all these children and all these young men, but where were the women who were producing them, you know? And I just went searching, going, there must, you know, what are the stories of the women that created the girls that are going to the Euros, that took those first steps for us. There's always somebody who stepped on before us. And they weren't in the IFA records. There's no record of women ever having played football. But I found them in the newspaper library because it was advertised like a show, because it was a family event.
So it was like a carnival almost.
Yeah, you know, the flute band played in the interval. One time they called it a burlesque match because the men tied their legs together. But it was how they publicised it and how there was 16,000 people coming to watch women's football. The Ireland team went to England and played in Goodison Park to 48,000 people. It was huge. We were doing amazing things in this city. And men's football at that time had become, you know, it became sectarian. The one place it wasn't was women's football. And that's why we were getting the numbers as well. And I went, how did I not know about this? And I started interviewing the women footballers now to see, you know, if attitudes changed. And obviously they hadn't much. But obviously the women, those young women, had never heard of this either. And these women are the ones that took the first step. And that's what I want to do as a writer, is shine a light on those people who came, those women who came before us, those women who took up, who had the nerve to take their space when they were told they weren't allowed to.
Is there a line, or was there something from... Sorry. Is there a line that stands out for you? I know you wrote them all, but is there something that really meant something to you whenever you were able to write it down and then hear it spoken?
I was very lucky because I got to be in my own play. But mostly I just come out and did a wee bit and then ran backstage and was able to stand under the stands and watch the audience. So watch you watching what I had written, which is frightening, by the way, and it might be a long time before I do it again. I wrote a little bit. This is awful. When I was young, I wanted a dog. And my mum said no, and I got a canary instead. And unfortunately...
Wait. From your mom, was she like, Dara, you can't have a dog, but here's a canary?
In a cage, and you can't take it out, and you can't take it for a walk, and it does nothing.
And what did you call it?
Oh, this is where it gets wrong. Mum, it's awful. This is going to be career suicide. Mum used to leave the gas cooker on quite a lot. So we had quite a lot of canaries. Some of which I didn't know were different because she just swapped them when we were at school. And then there was one time I come home and there was just a little China canary in the cage. Because the man in the pet shop wouldn't give us any more. And I wrote this as into...
Mass death of canaries.
Yeah, in West Belfast. There was bigger things happening, so nobody was looking. But I wrote it into the play as this metaphor for the main character, you know, being trapped in a cage and suffocated. And then when the girl said the line, the whole audience laughed. And I was like, no, it's a metaphor. It's a very deep metaphor. Even though, like in my head, I was going, why are you laughing? I went, well, because it's funny, okay? And watching, when my family came, I was watching all my sisters, and all of them were totally shocked. And they were like, I can't believe you've told people that. So my mother's passed, I don't have canaries. So you can't arrest me. But yeah, so it was one of those interesting things that you think is gonna get a reaction, and I got a completely different reaction.
Do you have a dog now?
I do.
She does, yes.
I do. But she's only wee.
Talk about the dog. Tell us about the dog. Tell Chelsea about the dog.
I'm 47 and I thought, you know what? If I want a dog, I'll have one.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Well done.
Thank you. And I told my partner, we're getting a dog. And he said, let's talk about it. And I went, and there she is. And I swore I wouldn't be a crazy dog lady, but I'm a crazy dog lady.
It happens to all of us.
And she doesn't have separation anxiety, I do.
Yeah.
It's...
Thank you for taking time away from her to be with us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Well, luckily I don't have children. I have 18 nieces and nephews who have children.
Yeah.
And they all come to my house, and unfortunately they've now started bringing their friends.
Yeah.
So my nephew Owen, who's 12, turns up and goes, this is my friend Oren, he would like a photograph with you.
You're famous.
You're gonna be like show and tell.
Yeah, well, I actually had a little chat with him about making it a business.
What did you think he should charge?
I think £2.50 is quite good.
I mean, I was gonna say 5.
No, you don't want to outdo it, you know. And there's 24 in his class. That's quite a bit of money.
Always thinking. Now, I am aware that we do have to get off the stage because the stones in pockets, they will become literally dancing on. But I wanted to open the floor, and I think we have roving mics as well. If anybody has any questions, we can take the next 10 minutes to hear from yourselves. So I don't know where the mics are, but oh, there they are. So if you want to put up your hand, and then the mics are there, please feel free to ask a question. Oh, there's a lady.
Oh, yes.
Okay,
I'm behind you.
if we can get the microphone to.
Hi,
Oh, good.
my name's Kathy Brennan, and I was lucky enough to go to school with Lynn. Tara Lynne O'Neill. I was just wondering about your days at St Genevieve's. Did anything inspire you to take the path that you're on now, today?
Well, as you know, Kathy, we were taught by nuns. And if I remember, now St Genevieve's isn't like that now, but I know when we were at school, if you wanted to be a doctor, they'd go, oh, be a nurse. You know, it was never aimed too high. But you remember, what made me want to be an actor was to be around groups of people. And that I got from school, because our school was great crack. I didn't like studying, but I loved going into school. I spent a lot of time outside doors for talking, as you well know, Kathy.
Did you have school plays that you got to be part of?
Yeah, but I never got a part because there were always musicals. But the nuns were interesting. But what made me want to be an actor is I never wanted to leave that environment of big groups of people.
Right. Yeah. Thank you, Kathy, for that. There was a lady down here at the front. If you come on down here, yeah. There you go. It's just here. Just here. Did you put your hand up again?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you.
This is actually for Tara again.
Oh dear, don't make Chelsea. Chelsea's our visitor.
I know. But I'm sure the lady in front of me, might have one for Chelsea. I'm also one of 7 children, so just really curious to know how you stepped into that space, because I'm the youngest girl, and I'm sort of progressed in my career now, but I just find it I'm really curious to know what steps you took to really just step out and take that brave decision of going into a career that was so uncertain. And yeah, I'd just love to hear more about that.
It's something I still battle with. Do you know, even being asked to come today and talk with Chelsea, this is like things nightmares are made of in my world. But writing...
So sorry.
No.
Sorry, Chelsea. It's not about you personally. No.
It's things like that. So I spent all last night going, don't say that. It's being myself that I'm the most uncomfortable with, and I think writing has helped with that, of finding my voice. But also just looking for the people that can help, and knowing that if that's what you want to do, you have to be happy to do all the other jobs. I mean, I have literally worked every job you can imagine. I mean, I have been, walking around the city centre in a fat suit and being beaten up by children, I have done it. I've tried everything, and I probably will go back, and you might see me next month in a fat suit in the city centre.
We won't beat you up, though.
But what we have here in Northern Ireland is especially in this theatre, is a really strong team of people who want to support you. And there's, in terms of writing, in terms of acting, it's out there. People are there to help. And always remember that everybody's the same. Every director is just, especially women, they're just a woman. Phone them and ask them for a cup of tea. Ask their advice. Everyone is approachable. And I think when I was younger, I kept thinking, you can't do that.
Yeah.
And I'm still learning that. Sometimes I go, I still can't ask that person for their time, because I feel like I'm not worthy of their time. but we have to, because we're being given these opportunities now as a woman, that we have to find our time and our space and be uncomfortable in it until we realise that we're home.
Good. Right, Belfast audience, please, a question for Chelsea Clinton.
Hello, I have a question for Chelsea.
Yo.
I am a bit like yourself. I've come from a long line of strong women and lots of strong female role models, but now I am the mother of 3 young boys. So I know that you have 2 boys. Okay. So I was just wondering, have you any advice for raising boys? We were always taught, you know, do what you want, you can do anything, you know, from very strong women. And now I'm trying to raise my boys and looking for some tips.
Yeah, so I also have 3. I though have a daughter and then 2 boys. I do see though the profound impact already on my son, who just turned 6, of kind of the intentional choices of the stories that we read to him. Because one of the things that I was really struck by when I started reading to my daughter was how many of the story books that we'd been given, some of which were, you know, kind of very early biographies of people, most of which though were kind of imaginary tales, were centered on not only boys but on kind of male characters. Like the number of like cows and ducks and frogs that were named like George. There's nothing wrong with George, right? But like, where was Tara? There wasn't really. Like, they were overwhelmingly male. And so thankfully, like supported by my husband, we made a really conscious choice to have like an equal representation in our library, and to every night read at least, you know, an equal representation, although admittedly we often read more stories about girls or centered on kind of female voices. And then I see that in my son, in that like he doesn't think it's strange when he loves superheroes, when like this month his favorite superhero is Wonder Woman. Like he doesn't think that's strange. And like next month it's Iron Man, and then like after that it's Batman. Like that feels normal to him. Or again, if you ask him, right, he loves math. If you ask him like who his role model is, he'll say Katherine Johnson, who's one of the women, thankfully, whose story now more people know because she was in the book and in the movie Hidden Figures. And he is fascinated by her because she skipped a couple grades in school. And then, yes, oh, by the way, like she created the math to help send people into space safely. And so I see how much that matters. I think it will become more challenging over time as there are more influences. I mean, he just finished kindergarten, so most of his life has been spent under me. Yes. It will become more challenging to continue to raise a kind, decent, good, you know, curious, motivated citizen leader, whatever he chooses to do in his life, whether he becomes a mathematician, which is what he currently says he wants to do, or he does something wildly different with his life. I do think it is harder with boys. I also think, though, that those of us who recognize that and are thinking about that then have the chance to raise the boys into the men that we believe are an important part of our future. Because I will also say one of the things that broke my heart was how few men there were at the protests on Friday. Because we need them to show up.
I'm so aware that the actors are going to come bouncing onto the stage. And any more questions before we wrap?
She's got a question.
Oh, sorry. Well spotted. Okay, and then we'll come to you then.
Oh my goodness. So we were just chatting that we saw you when you first came to Northern Ireland, so thank you for coming back. We're all excited. It's not Christmas, but it feels a bit like that for me, horse fighting. So thanks along for coming. My question is, obviously you and your family have been in the public eye, and our politicians have been in the public eye as well, and now we're starting to get that kind of peeled back layer of scrutiny. And how would you say you would ask young women to maybe arm themselves or weather the storm if they want to step into public life?
So thank you for the question. And I do think asking it before stepping into the storm hopefully helps you better weather the storm. Because public scrutiny, whether you're an actress or an activist or an author or a politician, or a scientist in these times of COVID-19, we do treat our women differently, right? Whether online or offline, in social media or traditional media, women are treated differently. They're not only treated differently in often the misogyny that is lobbed their way, but they're often given less space for themselves, meaning like if you have a couple of paragraphs to write about a male scientist, you're going to write about like what he's done and why you were interviewing him. If you're given 2 paragraphs to write about a woman scientist, you're going to spend a paragraph describing like what she was wearing and how her hair was that day and like did she have on her marquee pearls or not. And then she only gets 50% of what the man got. So it's not only the kind of overt misogyny, it's the more subtle but still very corrosive misogyny that continues to just be part of the reality of every kind of woman in public life. And of course, the amount of online abuse, we see how hard that is for even girls and young women, at least in the United States, for whom now their school is their public sphere. Because what may have been true when I was a kid, where someone might say something unkind in the hallway and then you go home, like that unkindness now can follow you home. And we know that online bullying is far more likely to be experienced by girls than boys, not to minimize what so many boys go through, just looking at the kind of distribution of abuse and who experiences it. So I think these are conversations we need to be having with everyone, and particularly young people in our lives, regardless of kind of aspiration or ambition. I think, though, there's a different kind of urgency needed if you are thinking about doing something more public. And I would say I am an only child, as you heard earlier, although I am thankfully very close to my parents. I have wonderful friends. And so for me, spending time, of course, with my children, who always restore me, but spending time with my friends who have known me sometimes my whole life. My oldest friend in the world, our mothers met in Lamaze class. She's 6 weeks older than I am. I've literally known her my whole life. Being vulnerable and open about when it is hard, so that hardness doesn't stay in us and kind of gets released and hopefully dealt with, so that you can then get up and go back into the arena. But I think it's a mistake when we minimize the difference and the challenge and what sometimes is called the gender tax, right, that we face as women in all aspects of life, but that then has an additional cost kind of in the public arena.
Wow, thank you. Well, I think we've just got time for one more question. Did you want to ask the question? We just needed a microphone down here in the front row. And then we'll have to wrap proceedings.
Although I kind of like the specter that they might come out and just start.
I have to say
And
that I quite like that idea as well, but...
It's Jared McCabe and Sean Blaney, the 2 actors, and I know them and I don't appreciate it.
Okay,
fair enough.
So my question is for Chelsea, but first of all, I just want to give a comment and a thanks to Tara, because you're an excellent role model, and you've not only just inspired many other women, but my colleague Jackie here, who has been berating me, my side is black and blue with elbow, and saying you have to take up space, you have to speak. My name is Patricia Lynne. I'm the first woman elected ever in the history of Northern Ireland.
Thank you.
And I'm hitting a redner, to the constituency of North Antrim. And you talk about weather in the storm, Chelsea, and just for context to my question, I'm in the middle of the storm. I've just left a meeting with a constituent who wanted to meet with me under the guise of mental health. Yeah. But the 3 questions he wanted to ask was I single, was I married, and did I plan to have children with my boyfriend? Last week, I attended a business event and had a business card by a multimillionaire businessman from Northern Ireland stuffed down my top. Yeah. So my question to Chelsea is, I was at an event where I spoke on a panel about the abuse women receive online and in this election in person, physically and verbally. And I was utterly heartbroken at the end of the event to be publicly asked a question by a woman, which was, you know, women are doing really well in Northern Ireland now, we're taking up space, men are intimidated. What can you and other female elected representatives do to alleviate the fears of men? Now, I didn't answer that question because I didn't know how to, but I'm also cognizant that while I want to advocate for the marginalised groups as well as women and girls, I have a duty towards men, and I'm just really keen, without any pressure, to know, how would you respond to that?
So I'm going to start with the second part of your question and then go to your recent experiences and offer some reflections there. I was maybe like 6 weeks ago being interviewed, and I think, I mean, I have no reason not to think, like a quite well-meaning man who was interviewing me, largely about, for context, kind of what had happened with COVID in the United States. And then he said, you know, I've just noticed, like, you seem to be, you know, just increasingly focused on girls and women. Like, you know, you've written these books, and now your most recent podcast, you only spoke to women. Aren't you worried you're missing the male perspective? And I said, no. I can pick up a history book. If I need the male perspective, I can pick up a newspaper. If I need the male perspective. And he was so taken aback, I think, because it was a really genuine question. And I share that, you know, recent experience I had in the context of your recent experience, because I think that it hopefully highlights an opportunity to help people understand why we experience those questions so differently than what prompted them to be asked. It also, though, highlights, I think, what a precarious time we're in. You know, certainly in the United States, there are many of us, you know, who I think respectfully but forcefully continue to point out that progress only feels like oppression when you've been on the winning side of inequality for generations. And yet I think that for people as individuals, sometimes kind of that framing doesn't really make sense to them because they feel like, why are they not being listened to? I think it is easier for me than for you in that I have accountability at the end of the day, you know, to myself and to my assessment of my potential. I'm actually a quite religious person, so to what I understand God to mean to me, to the specter of my grandmother, who I spoke about earlier and is very much always with me. I definitely have like, what would Grandma Dorothy want me to do moment often. I don't have constituents. You have a different challenge. I think you have a harder challenge than I do. I also think we are living in a time in which, even in recently historically safe places, women are being more endangered. And so I think there is the challenge for all of us, although again, more challenging for you because you do have constituents to whom you have an obligation to meet and engage with, to how you navigate doing that in a way that helps protect you while also doesn't further kind of essentialize you and make you just that much more gendered in the eyes of your constituents. And I think only you can navigate finding that right balance. Certainly women elected officials in the United States at all levels of government are also having to navigate that terrain. And so I would say, too, on a personal basis, I'm happy to put you in touch with some of them, because you should not feel so alone, and you may be able to learn something together. And so either someone who works with me will find you, or you will find me afterwards.
Thank you. Did you want to say something?
I was just going to shamelessly say, if you would like to come to Ballymena, we would love to host you.
Next time. Next time.
No. She's only got one invitation, and that's to the Wave Machine in Lisnagalvin. Okay. I don't know about you, but when I was asked to do this tonight, I was nervous, because to me, I feel like I've known Chelsea Clinton all my life. She's somebody that's grown up in the public domain. And as I said to her earlier on, I did meet her mum and dad whenever they came to Derry in the 90s. I have found an extraordinary woman here who is ready to talk about issues and has a strength and a sincerity to her. Likewise, Tara Lynne O'Neill is somebody I've known for a long time, but whose bravery in coming out tonight and not hiding behind a character has only made me love her even more so. This event has been quite unique and has been curated by Oliver Jeffers, Our Place in Space. It's part of Unboxed Festival and the Nerve Centre. Extraordinary Conversations is what it's about, and I feel that tonight we've had one here in the Lyric. Thank you to you for coming. We have to let this theatre space do what it does well and let it go back to being a playhouse. But thank you so much to Chelsea Clinton and Tara Lynne O'Neill.